These works were the first works, these were the things he was working on after he left New York. And as I was talking about before I sort of broke up a little bit, was Captiva, this island that he had moved to. He wanted to get away from the fame, recognition, the New York scene, and just wanted to fish and be back on the water. Some clairvoyant or something had told him that he should be on the water. And he found Captiva Island. When he arrived on Captiva, there were butterflies flying around, and there was just something that just said, this is home. And, but there were problems with that because it was an island without a road. I mean, there was a road, but you had to take a ferry, and the ferry stopped at 8 o'clock. And Bob was actually a little bit paranoid about that because he says, well, what if I want to do something after 8 o'clock? And then the materials, getting materials to work with. So that's when he really started working with cardboard because he thought, well, there's cardboard everywhere. And of course, he was getting packages from New York, so we had some cardboard. And that's when he started working with cardboard. Now, the funny thing about this whole period is one of the most wonderful periods. I consider one of the most open-minded, creative period. Even though they weren't accepted at the time, I think they equal the early years of the Combines because it was a fresh attitude. No one had even thought of these things in this manner. And they were not accepted. You could sell them. You know, he didn't make any money, but, you know, I mean, he made enough to live. That was basically it. And it's quite ironic now that he ended up owning most of them. And a lot of that period. But the last cardboard, and that was before he was dead, it was a couple of years ago, sold for like $1.5 million, $1.7 million. What you couldn't got $10 for them in the 70s. And it's just, and then the good thing is because he had very little of his early work from the 50s. Reason being, well, number one, no one wanted them. And a very funny thing is, another ironic story is, he tried to give his landlord a painting for the rent. His rent was $15, and the landlord turned down the painting for the $15 rent. But for some reason, the landlord kept that letter. And so about a year, or less than a year ago, he writes Bob and saying, well, I didn't take the painting, but is this letter worth anything? And the painting he turned down, the Museum of Modern Art bought for $14 million. And all Bob wanted was this $15 rent. So, and of course, and Bob said, well, the letter's not worth anything. Too bad you didn't take the painting. So it came around. But, you know, only in his late years. But Bob loved life so much. I witnessed him through those last few years often go into cardiac arrest. And I think he had 24-hour-a-day nurses, usually 2. Unfortunately, in his later years, he had enough money to be able to have that. But he took every opportunity to continue to live. And I would never, because I actually became so close to him that I supervised his care, that I didn't want to take anything. He had to have a future. And when he had the show in Porto, I was hesitant to let him go, but I thought, if he dies, going to what he wants to do, that's better than watching TV and dying watching The Price is Right or a soap opera. You know, I mean, he had to have that candy at the end of a stick to continue to move forward. And he actually did go into cardiac arrest on the flight to Porto. And his nurse was there, and she reacted. I reacted, jumped on top, started doing, you know, because I had to do it so many times, revived him. And he always came back. And he lived another 6 months. One never knew but one was not going to. There had to be tomorrow. There had to be one more fun thing to do. There had to be another painting. And when he died, he was working on a painting even though he was on a hospital bed. And mostly paralyzed. But he'd tell his assistant, say, okay, put that there. Move it a little to the left. No, I don't like that. Put it over here. Move it up there. You know, and he directed when he was in the hospital bed those last few days. Now, he never finished that painting, but that painting is caught frozen the way it was, and it will never be displayed except for on a table because it's not a complete painting. But he was working the day he died, even though he couldn't move. He was paralyzed.
What's the painting called?
I don't think he had time to title it. It wasn't even complete. It was only laid out. The people had put what he wanted where he wanted it, but it was not, because he could not participate in it. But yet he still wanted to play. He still wanted to do it. I understand that. I myself, now, I enjoy art so much, and it was one of the things we had in common. Art, to me, is like if you love tennis, yoga, or whatever you love in life. And Bob was, he loved doing art so much. It wasn't a job, it was joy. And to get paid to do what you absolutely love to do. What a world. And he got to have it for 83 years. Now I remember 4 years ago, 5 years ago, before he died, maybe 4 years before he died, I used to help the nurses put him to bed. And I'd sit there and talk to him for a while. And he said, Darryl, I know my life's coming to an end. But he said, you know, I've had such a, fucking wonderful life. That makes it worse. I don't want to let it go. And he lived 4 more years. And he was at that point, it took 2 people for him to, because he could not move his own body. And it took 2 people to put him in bed. But yet he could still maneuver and work once he was in his chair. He did have his left arm. And he could no longer sign, but yeah, he still signed his paintings with his left hand. Because he actually was born left-handed. And they taught him to be right-handed. Because that was the sign of the devil. So it worked okay for him in the end, having been born left-handed. He actually didn't do too badly on the larger paintings, but he couldn't sign drawings because he couldn't do details of his signature. But if it's the big painting, it was okay to have a messy signature. But on a drawing, you don't want a messy. So he did thumbprints. He did thumbprints.